The air in this forgotten substation thrums with a low, steady pulse, a counterpoint to the distant city's drone. Tube amps glow a warm orange, casting long shadows across stacks of hand-labeled vinyl and Xeroxed broadsides. A faint aroma of ozone and brewing ginger tea hangs, a quiet testament to the signal's steady defiance.
Black Star Pirate Radio.
Across Oranienzicht, the dial sits at 67 Fahrenheit under sunny. Wind check, south-southeast at 6 miles an hour. Missouri's rising waters expose the fragile architecture of preparedness, turning summer solace for hundreds into an airborne escape.
Over 200 campers, primarily children from Camp Penuel in rural Wayne County, Missouri, were airlifted to safety by National Guard helicopters after flash floods from torrential rains inundated their TogeeVision.com, leaving roads impassable. This immediate crisis exposed the inherent vulnerability of remote recreational facilities to escalating climate events, putting children, camp staff, and first responders at direct risk. One viable alternative, state emergency management could mandate a preemptive evacuation protocol for camps within known floodplains, utilizing predictive hydrological models and scheduled busing, rather than waiting for an aerial rescue to become the only option.
The image of choppers plucking kids from rising waters, while a testament to human courage, also invokes the mythic floods that demand a deeper wisdom. This isn't just about escape, it's about reimagining our civic architecture to flow with the land, not against it. The chosen next move. Communities near these flood-prone areas must activate hyperlocal flood resilience networks, building elevated communal shelters and marked escape routes, empowering residents to be their own first responders, carrying this lineage of self-reliance forward.
The initial scramble for rescue, while heroic, reveals a reactive posture. True autonomy, both personal and civic, demands foresight, a structural integrity that anticipates the flow rather than merely reacting to the deluge. How do we build that into our collective bedrock?
Beyond the immediate airlift, the financial burden of such operations often falls to taxpayers through federal disaster relief funds like FEMA, diverting resources from other essential public services. Insurance coverage for private camps and floodplains is becoming increasingly complex and expensive, creating a ripple effect on tuition costs and accessibility. The preemptive busing alternative isn't just about safety, it's an economic hedge, potentially saving millions in emergency response, property damage, and the psychological trauma inflicted on affected families and first responders who witness such close calls. It's about building a sharp discernment and cost-benefit analysis into our preparedness architecture.
The land speaks, if we choose to listen. Indigenous wisdom often teaches us to respect the natural cycles of water, to build with the flood in mind, not against it. The toxic residue here isn't just the physical mud, it's the cultural amnesia that forgets the provenance of these floodplains, the hubris that builds without consent from the earth itself. The next move, then, is to incorporate ecological literacy into our civic planning, using humor to disarm the can't-do-bro attitudes, perhaps by staging community-wide flood drills that are both educational and playfully engaging, transforming confusion into proactive collective muscle, fostering dignity and preparedness.
Patching in a caller. You're on the signal.
Hello, Togee. This sounds like an expensive recurring nightmare. Who actually pays for these massive airlift operations? Is it federal aid, state funds, or does the camp's insurance eventually cover it? And how much could that preemptive busing system actually save us compared to waiting for disaster?
A reel-to-reel stutters somewhere in the back room, then finds its groove. The board glows amber. You hit on the core tension caller, the reactive cost versus proactive investment. From Missouri's immediate flooding, we pivot now to a different kind of systemic breakdown. Imagine a whole nation plunged into darkness, not by nature's fury, but by crumbling infrastructure. Cuba suffers its third nationwide blackout in 6 months, leaving millions in agony, exposing deep structural vulnerabilities.
Cool down is when habits set. Swap the tiresome combo for a clean two-step people want to repeat.
This latest power grid collapse plunged all 11 million Cuban citizens into darkness for up to 48 hours, affecting hospitals, food storage, and water pumps, especially in major cities like Havana and Santiago. The immediate cause often points to breakdowns at aging thermal power plants, like the Antonio Maceo plant in Santiago de Cuba, which are operating with limited maintenance. This repeated failure exposes every facet of daily life to severe disruption, from basic sustenance to communication. A direct alternative path, Cuba could prioritize decentralized energy solutions, deploying solar microgrids in key community hubs and hospitals, creating energy islands that maintain critical services even if the main grid fails.
When the lights go out across an entire island, it's more than just an inconvenience. It's a cultural shock, disrupting social rhythms and collective memory, a modern-day shadow play. The narrative of resilience shifts from enduring scarcity to actively building new foundations. The chosen next move for Cuba's energy future demands a national pivot toward communal solar initiatives, with neighborhood collectives installing rooftop panels and battery storage, becoming the new stewards of light, carrying the power themselves block by block.
The shadow of systemic failure can erode the very architecture of collective self-worth. When basic services falter, the question of autonomy, both national and personal, becomes stark. Who controls the light, and by extension, the narrative of a people's struggle? This isn't just about technology. It's about dignity in the face of imposed scarcity.
The U.S. economic blockade, explicitly mentioned in the article, significantly exacerbates these issues by restricting access to spare parts, fuel, and foreign investment necessary for grid modernization. This directly affects not only the 11 million citizens, but also Cuba's ability to participate in global trade and maintain critical social services like healthcare and education. While decentralized solar microgrids are viable, the funding question raised by the caller is crucial. A viable funding mechanism could involve international humanitarian aid focused on sustainable energy infrastructure, leveraging green loans from development banks, or even encouraging diaspora investment in community-level projects, bypassing central government red tape and external pressures where possible. This redefines provenance for energy production, integrating logic with the desperate emotional need for light.
Prometheus stole fire from the gods, a defiant act to bring light and knowledge to humanity. Cuba's struggle for light, under the shadow of a blockade, resonates with this myth of sovereign will against external constraint. The toxic residue here is the rhetoric that blames only internal mismanagement, obscuring the externally imposed agony. The actionable vector here is to cultivate an energy literacy movement, using humor in public campaigns to explain how solar works, demystifying technology, turning confusion into collective empowerment. This fosters a sense of dignity, knowing that light can be generated by their own hands, an assertion of structural self-worth.
We've got someone. Patching in a caller? Go ahead.
Togee, with these blackouts, who really suffers the most? Is it just inconvenience, or are there real health and safety risks? And if they go with solar, who's going to fund that on a national scale for an economy like Cuba's? Where does that capital come from?
The suffering is profound, caller, impacting everything from healthcare to food preservation. And the question of funding is critical, which brings us to a different kind of liberation-seeking legal recognition, where economic models intersect with cultural identity and personal autonomy. In Kenya, the High Court is poised to rule on a petition from Rastafarian groups seeking legal recognition for cannabis use, a case that tests the boundaries of religious freedom and public health policy.
The Rastafarian community in Kenya, estimated to be several thousand strong, faces ongoing arrests and social stigmatization for their sacramental use of cannabis, which they refer to as ganja. This legal challenge, brought forward by the Rastafari Society of Kenya, argues that the current Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Control Act infringes on their constitutional right to freedom of conscience, religion, belief, and opinion. This petition exposes a direct clash between traditional legal frameworks and minority religious practices. An alternative legal approach, rather than outright legalization or continued prohibition, could be the implementation of a specific religious exemption within the existing drug laws, similar to models seen in other nations for certain ceremonial substances.
The sacred herb ganja for Rastafarians is not merely a substance but a vital sacrament, a conduit to spiritual understanding and communal identity, deeply woven into their cultural lineage from Ethiopia to the Caribbean shores and now Kenya. To deny its use is to deny a core aspect of their being. The chosen next move, beyond the court's immediate ruling, is for policymakers to engage directly with Rastafarian elders, fostering dialogue to craft legislation that respects religious freedom while establishing regulated communal cultivation and ceremonial use, thereby integrating, rather than isolating, this architectural signal of faith.
Here, the architecture of law meets the architecture of faith. When the state dictates the parameters of spiritual practice, it challenges the very foundation of individual and collective autonomy. How do we discern between genuine spiritual sustenance and perceived public harm, particularly when the toxic residue of colonial-era drug laws still clings to the policy debate?
Historically, many drug laws across Africa, including Kenya's, are vestiges of colonial mandates designed to control indigenous populations and suppress cultural practices, rather than based purely on public health. This legal challenge, therefore, affects not just Rastafarians, but also sets a precedent for other minority groups whose spiritual or cultural practices might clash with inherited legal frameworks. Beyond religious freedom, there are significant economic implications. A regulated cannabis market, even for religious use, could generate tax revenue, create jobs in cultivation and processing, and potentially attract niche cultural tourism, as seen in parts of the Caribbean. The alternative of a religious exemption could be a first step, demonstrating a legal architecture that values consent and provenance over outdated prohibition, allowing for dignity in practice.
Anansi, the trickster spider, often uses cleverness to expose hypocrisy. The toxic residue here is the hypocrisy of selective cultural acceptance, praising indigenous herbs in traditional medicine while criminalizing them in a spiritual context. This is about consent to one's own spiritual architecture, integrating logic and emotion. The actionable vector here is to spark a national conversation, perhaps through humorous public education campaigns that demystify cannabis, distinguishing sacramental use from recreational abuse, using fables and proverbs to explain its cultural provenance. This builds bridges, turning societal confusion into a vector for understanding and respect, ensuring dignity for all expressions of faith within the civic architecture.
Callers on. Go ahead.
Togee, if Kenya allows this, what's the real cost versus benefit? Are we talking about a slippery slope to broader legalization with potential public health issues? Or is there an economic benefit here, maybe even tourism, that the government is overlooking by sticking to old laws? Who stands to gain or lose?
The economic implications are certainly part of the debate, Kala, as are the considerations of individual liberty and cultural preservation. The court's decision will set a precedent not just for religious freedom, but for how Kenya navigates its own complex civic architecture in a changing world, asserting its right to build its own structural self-worth.
Teach through play.
Black Star Pirate Radio.
Continue the signal at TogeeVision.com. Tune in, Sparks and Stories, Gig Passport.